Hi there, BookTube, and this is a quick tag. This is the 7 Deadly Sins tag, so you won't be surprised to find there's 7 questions relating to the 7 Deadly Sins. And I first saw this on Razmika Likes Books' channel, and I'll link to that at the bottom. Unfortunately, I went to the link to the original poster of this tag, and that video no longer exists, and I don't even know if the user exists, so I can't go back to the origin. Anyway, so question 1, greed. What is your most inexpensive book? What is your most expensive book? Okay, so on the inexpensive, it's obviously going to be saying second hand. And I don't buy second-hand books very often these days. I used to do it a lot more when there were a lot on my doorstep where I worked and stuff, and now where I work there aren't any. Franz Kafka, Metamorphosis and Other Stories, and you'll see, if I could hold this straight it would help, 2p. But that's not what I paid for it, because you can see the 2p is crossed out, and I actually paid 50p. So that was the markup at the charity shop. But, you know, good luck to them. And the other one is this. The official dancehall dictionary, which is a dictionary of sort of Jamaican patois terms that have come into English everyday use. And I didn't pay anything for this because it says here copy for Dave Saul, which is my real name, finally revealed, not my writer and BookTube name. I worked at Rough Trade Record Shop, and obviously this sort of had a tie-in with sort of Jamaican dancehall music, so we got them in stock, and I said, oh, I like the look of that. And they gave me one, so I didn't actually pay anything for it, so technically it cost me 0. And I shall give you a couple of words just to give you an idea. Obviously I'm not going to do it in Jamaican yardie style. So dem de, those, dem ya, these. I'll obviously have to slightly go through these because some of them are pretty politically incorrect. Drapers, suspenders or braces. That's the letter D. Bade, to make a killing, as in im horse win am im bade, i.e. he bet on a horse and it made him some money, I suspect. Bangarang, noisy disturbance, commotion, confusion. I wrote a piece using a lot of words in this, but it never saw the light of day, and probably just as well. Right, that's greed. I know, because I've got the most expensive books. Okay. So, Cobralingus by Jeff New, which is long out of print, and I said in my the last 10 books tag, which I originated, that I had to wait a long time looking on eBay and Amazon secondhand for this. It was always about £60, and that was more than I was prepared to pay. And I spotted it, I think on eBay, obviously someone who didn't know its true value, and I got it for £16 in there, which is an absolute bargain. And it is in my all-time top 10 books. If you go to the top 10s tag, started by Old Blues Chapter and Verse, which he and I both encourage you to contribute your own, because Jason at Old Blue wants to compile all or as many BookTubers' top 10s as possible to see which are the most popular books across BookTube. So please, please, please do that, and I'll leave the link to the video down below. So that's that one. So £16. And then, as a writer, any good writer ought to have a good book of anatomy. And, you know, this is mine. And obviously this is quite a chunky textbook, and it's going to cost money. And I don't know if you can see this. And £19.95, so that moves into the lead ahead of the Jeff New and Cobralingus. And yet, although I don't really write sort of crime, mystery, thriller, it's still important to have a book on sort of sexuality. And calling it an illustrated history, you think, well, you know, this is really an art book, so that's going to push the price up. And indeed, I don't know if you can see that. If I could hold it straight. I know I can't hold anything straight today. £42.95. We have a winner. This is probably the most expensive book I own. So there you go. Question 2. Wrath. Or is it Wrath? The Greats of Wrath. The Wrath of Can. Anyway. What author do you have a love-hate relationship with? Well, this is easy for me because I've actually made a video on exactly called My Love-Hate Relationship with China Miéville. So the sound quality isn't great, so you kind of have to be really dedicated to want to go. And I will put the link down here, but as I say, it's not the greatest sound quality. And he just drives me potty because some of his books are, you know, It's as if the reader is 6 years old and then he can write a book like Embassy Town, which is a supreme work of fiction about, it's a sort of science fiction genre, but it's all about language and how language works and the imagination that he has consistently, but he doesn't always execute it. And in his last book of his that I read, which was The Last Days of the New Paris, which was all about sort of surrealism and a sort of alternative speculative history of World War II, that it continued on in, past 1945. The Germans were still in Paris fighting the French resistance, who was supplemented by the surrealist movement, but not the artists, but the works of art come to life. So it was a brilliant book, but just it's so plodding, the plot, and the two main characters, they move on from one, brutal sort of scene to another, and they have no emotions, no reaction, and it's just terrible. So, wrath. Yes, he makes me wrathful. Question 3, gluttony. What books have you deliciously devoured over and over with no shame whatsoever? Well, the only book I've devoured over and over and again is L'Étranger by Albert Camus, which I read every year, once a year for 10 years back in my between 20s and 30s. I no longer do that. But I don't see why I should feel sort of shame about the fact that I do that. I mean, it's a great book. And I don't really understand the notion of guilty pleasures. I mean, there are books that may be sort of unsound, and you might have to, someone sort of, challenges you while you're reading that book or that author. Then you might have to get into it. But I don't see why you should feel guilty about anything that you read. Sloth. What book have you neglected reading due to laziness? Well, it's not only laziness, it's also intimidation, and that is Ulysses by James Joyce and Proust, A Remembrance of Things Past. I bought Ulysses when I was 18 and it's still sat there on my bookshelf out in the shed, and the Remembrance of Things Past is a 21st birthday present from my parents and is sat next to the Joyce, still unopened. So I don't feel very good about that, and maybe when I retire from work I can bucket list those two. Pride. What book do you most talk about in order to sound like a very intellectual reader? Well, I feel slightly offended by this question because I would never talk about a book just to sound intellectual. The book I talk about most is The Age of Wire and String, but I'm talking into the wind because no one's listening, and I don't think I've ever sat down, buttonholed someone about it. I talk about it a lot, to the unknown millions, hundreds, tens of you who watch it on BookTube. But it's certainly not to seem intellectual. Lust. What attributes do you find most attractive in male or female characters? Well, it would be a mixture of cynicism and humour, or humour through cynicism. Humour alone, there's plenty of funny characters. So Steve Toltz, the Australian author who wrote A Fraction of the Whole, the narrator of that is very funny. Barney's version by Mordechai Richler. Barney is a very funny voice to be good company with for the duration of the book. And Steve Tesseck's Saul Carew is a very, very funny character. The cynicism is probably a bit harder to do, so I'm going to recommend a character from my debut novel, which came out in, I think, 2009, quite a long time ago now anyway, called Karen Dash, who has a very cynical view on the world. She starts in the novel as an academic's wife, but she herself is not an academic, so she's sort of there as eye candy when he goes to official university functions, and she soon sort of leaves that world. The next incarnation is a gangster's mole, where she it's a tough male world, violent world, and she more than holds her own, but she makes a mistake and has to go on the run, having faked her own death. And the third incarnation, she ends up as a sort of storyteller for drinks, counting drinks on one of those sort of sex and booze holiday resorts on Kavos in Corfu. But she's pretty cynical, and having lived the life that she'd lived, who wouldn't be? And last question, envy. What books would you most like to receive as a gift? Well, if you watched, again, my last 10 books tag, you'll see it's Michael Gira's The Consumer, which I will repeat the story around that. But it's not, I'm not envious of anyone else because I don't know anyone else who's got it. And no one's going to buy it for a gift for me because you could only get it second hand, again, either very expensive, or you can get it in German, which is not a lot of use to me. It seems to become increasingly more rare in English. So it's more like a holy grail than a gift. And the story behind it is, well, Michael Gira is the singer-songwriter of the band Swans, and he writes these really pared-down lyrics where he just strips out anything, any adornment. So it's basically I, verb, you, and it's all about power relations. And he wrote a book of short stories which were in similar veins. So I really wanted to get hold of that. And you couldn't get it anywhere in England. It was before Swans were sort of well known. It's when they started out in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And somehow I got hold of an email address either for him or his office, and I sent a $20 currency note in the post to him saying, "Dear Michael, can't get hold of your book. I hope this is enough to cover it. I know I shouldn't send money through the post, but please, I can't seem to get it any other way." And I never heard anything for about a year, and I thought, well, it didn't go to the right place, or someone intercepted it, or even he's kept it. And after a year, I got an airmail letter back. I don't know if you remember them. They're they have those sort of red and blue chevrons all around the border, sort of par avion in the top left corner, I think. And I opened it up, and it was empty. There's nothing inside it, and I thought, this is odd. No return address on the back. And then as I studied it, he typed inside the chevron, sort of going down and then going back up the other side. So I don't know quite how he did that, but anyway, it just said, if you shouldn't, don't. So he'd kept my money. He'd received it and he kept my money. But rather than feeling outraged or anything, I thought, no, that's fitting somehow. But the problem is I've still never tracked down this blessed book. So that is, I can't be envious because I have no one to be envious of, but that is my holy grail. So there you have it. That's my 7 Deadly Sins tag. I'm not going to tag it on because I know it's been around for an enormous length of time. So feel free to do it. Thanks to Razmika Likes Books for cluing me in onto it. And I sort of responded to her version. We had a conversation. She said you should do it. So I've done it. Okay, thanks very much. Till next time.